Let's understand something very basic, very fundamental. God is not somewhere far away. He is not hiding behind the clouds or locked in a temple or sitting in a book. He is not absent, he is simply unheard. Not because he doesn't speak, but because you are too loud. Your thoughts are like traffic in Mumbai at peak hour, constant, chaotic, and everyone wants to be first. In such noise, even your own heart becomes hard to hear. So how will you hear the divine? To hear, you don't need to go anywhere. You need to become quiet. To become quiet, you don't need to gain anything. You need to drop. So let's look at 6 habits you must quit, not for religion, not for society, but simply to make space for the divine to enter. 1. Quit constant talking. Even inside your head, you don't have to speak to make noise. The voice in your head always planning, judging, complaining, that is louder than thunder. Sit for 2 minutes, just watch your breath. And you'll see how noisy you are. God doesn't scream, he whispers. If you want to hear, stop talking inside. And quit needing to be right. This is the biggest ego trip. Always defending your opinion, your belief, your version of the truth. If your cup is always full, how will anyone pour anything into it, let alone the infinite? Let go of being right, just be open. In openness, grace moves. 3. Quit overindulging, food, screens, sensations, the body is the temple. You can't hear sacred silence if there's a rock concert inside. Every time you overfeed, overstimulate, overconsume, you are building a wall between yourself and the subtle. Eat what nourishes, watch what uplifts. Be with what awakens, not because it's a rule, but because it makes you more receptive. 4. Quit the habit of complaining. Every complaint is a rejection of life as it is. God is not a vending machine for your preferences. If you cannot accept what is, how will you embrace what is beyond? Gratitude is not a ritual, it's a state where you become large enough to hold God's voice. 5. Quit trying to control everything. The more you try to control, the more anxious you become. When you're anxious, you're closed. When you're closed, you're deaf spiritually. Let go, let things flow. In surrender, there is a vast silence. In that silence, something far greater than you begins to move. 6. Quit identifying with every thought and emotion. You are not your anger. You are not your anger. You are not your fear. You are the space in which these things arise. The more you believe every thought is you, the more you drift from what is real. When you see thoughts like passing clouds, then the sky, the vast blue endless sky, becomes visible again. That sky is him. So you see, hearing God is not about going to heaven. It is about becoming empty enough so that heaven can speak through you. Let go of these habits, not as punishment, not out of guilt, but as a gesture of love. Because silence is not the absence of noise. Silence is the presence of God. You sit and ask, where is God? Why is he not answering? Why do I not feel him? Why does he not show himself? But you do not realize that the divine is not absent, not silent, not hiding, but simply unheard because the noise within you is too loud, too restless, too demanding. And in this inner crowd of your own making, there is no space left for the whisper of the infinite to reach your ears. Because it is not the absence of God that you are experiencing, but the presence of constant mental chatter that drowns the sacred into silence. You wake up with thoughts already speaking, planning, remembering, wanting, regretting, fearing, hoping, controlling, never once allowing a gap to simply be, never once creating a pause wide enough for the eternal to enter, and you call this normal, you call this life. But it is merely survival under the weight of your own unexamined mind, which does not know how to be still even for a breath. And so the question is not whether God exists, but whether you have a truly listen. Not with ears, but with the stillness behind your eyes and the openness beneath your skin. You pray, but your prayer is often just another way of speaking, another way of asking, another way of filling the air with your voice. As if the divine cannot enter unless you decorate the doorway with your need. And yet it is in the moments between the words, in the sacred silence after the last theme in our or a plea that the presence begins to seep in like cool water beneath a closed door, slowly, patiently, quietly, waiting for your noise to soften just enough to be. You seek answers, but sometimes what you call answers are just confirmations of what you already want to believe in. And anything that challenges your noise is seen as discomfort. So you reject it, but God does not argue, does not push, does not compete with your inner voice. He waits, like the sun behind thick clouds, not lost, not far, but obscured by the storm you carry in your own sky. And as long as the storm is your habit, the sun will feel like a myth, even when it's burning just behind a veil. You search for meaning, for signs, for visions and voices, but the very act of searching often becomes noisy too, because you search with the mind, you search with effort, with tension, with the same hands that grasp at the world. forgetting that the sacred is not found by reaching out, but by falling in, by dissolving the layer that keeps you separate from the stillness that has never left, only been muffled. And this muffling, this thick wall, is made of your own constant narrative about who you are, what should happen, what has happened, and what must never happen again. You are conditioned to fill every silence with sound, every gap with movement, every feeling with distraction. And so the subtle becomes invisible, the quiet becomes unbearable, the divine becomes incomprehensible, not because it is too complex, but because it is too simple, too immediate, too intimate. And that level of closeness frightens the part of you that survives by staying busy, staying in control, staying noisy, but that same part also hungers deeply, painfully, silently for peace. It resists, says. You think God must descend or arrive or manifest with drama and thunder, but God is not interested in display. He is not trying to impress. He is simply here, already here, in this breath, in this very moment, in the still point between your thoughts, in the quiet space where you have not yet named the world. And that space, that timeless now, is available not through effort but through surrender. Not by doing more, but by dropping what is not needed, which is almost everything you cling to. You will hear God when you are no longer the only voice in the room, when your mind bows to the mystery it cannot solve, when your need to speak becomes less than your willingness to listen, when your inner static calms enough to allow the sacred signal to come through. And in that moment, which is not in time, you will see that God was never gone. He was never missing, he was never silent. It was just that your noise was too loud. You speak of wanting clarity, of wanting answers, of seeking truth, of finding the divine path. But you must understand that clarity is not something that descends upon a turbulent mind like lightning in a storm. It is something that reveals itself in the gentle, unwavering stillness beneath the storm, not in the noise of constant thinking, not in the frenzy of solving everything, not in the search for more information or more control, but in the quiet space that exists only when thought loses its grip and you are not pulled by every sensation that rises. You think you are searching for truth, but often you are merely chasing reflections in a disturbed pool, mistaking movement for depth, activity for insight, forgetting that a lake does not show the mountain clearly until it is calm, until every ripple of worry, wave of desire, every gust of opinion has settled, and in the same way your mind cannot show you the real, not God, not your soul, not even yourself, until it stops trying to impose meaning and simply allows what is to be seen without interference. You read books, you follow teachings, you attend talks and collect ideas, hoping they will bring you to the center, but the center cannot be reached by accumulation. The center is not made of concepts or beliefs, it is not an achievement or a conclusion. It is a presence that only emerges when you stop looking outward and begin to become still enough inwardly that even thought has nothing more to say. And in that vast, unmoving silence, clarity arises on its own. Not because you summoned it, but because you finally stepped out of its way. You meditate, but even meditation becomes noisy when it is done with effort, with expectation, with the intention of gaining something or becoming someone, and yet the deepest stillness comes when meditation is not done at all but simply happens. When you stop trying to meditate and instead fall into being, like a feather released from the hand, not needing to land, not needing to go anywhere, just resting in air, and in that effortless descent, something eternal opens its eyes within. You cannot think your way to the divine because thought is always movement, always separation, always comparison, and the divine is not separate, not subject to thoughts, categories or language or logic. It is what remains when thought is no longer needed. When the question has dropped because the questioner has dissolved, and in that dissolving, there is no longer the seeker and the sought, there is only seeing, only being, only that which was always present but hidden behind the veil of mental noise. You ask for vision, for guidance, for signs, but the purest vision is not a picture, not a voice, not a sensation. It is the absence of distortion, the unfiltered awareness that simply sees without coloring, without reaching, without naming. And this is only possible when your mind becomes still not by force, but by understanding that all its movements are echoes of the past or projections of the future, and that the real moment, the sacred now, is not something to be reached, but something to be reached, but something to be uncovered through quiet. You fear stillness because it feels like emptiness, because your identity has been built around movement, noise, reaction, purpose. But what you call emptiness is simply the space where truth begins to sing, where the eternal whispers, where life is no longer something you carry but something that carries you. And if you can sit with that stillness without flinching, without escaping into activity, you will find that it is not emptiness at all but fullness. too vast for words. You must come to stillness not as a technique, not as a practice, but as a recognition that without it, you are only seeing through a fog lens, hearing through static, living on the surface of things while missing the depth. And when the mind rests, truly rests without resistance, without need, clarity arises like the sun from behind a long night, not with drama, not with noise, but with a warmth and knowing that needs no explanation, because in stillness, what is true becomes self-evident. You live in a world that constantly teaches you to add knowledge, add possessions, add opinions, add achievements, add layers of identity and meaning and worth, as if more is always better, as if fullness comes from accumulation. But in truth, the more you add, the heavier you become. And the heavier you become, the less you can feel, the less you can move, the less you can hear the delicate pulse of life beneath all the layers you've gathered to protect, to prove. Become, forgetting that becoming is only needed when being is not understood. You think growth is about addition, another book, another scale, another mantra, another title, another tool, but often all these things become just another layer between you and what is already whole. Uphill transformation is not in what you carry, but in what you drop. Not in what you build on top, but in what you remove from within. And just like a sculptor does not create by adding clay, but by chipping away what does not belong, you too must learn that becoming free is more about subtraction than accumulation. You fill your space, your time, your thoughts, your relationships, and even your spirituality with content, with action, with effort, hoping that more will eventually feel like enough. Because the feeling of lack is not caused by what is missing on the outside, but by the noise you haven't let go of on the inside. And until you release the grip on what you think you need to be, what you think you must have, what you believe you cannot live without, you will keep building walls while imagining you are creating bridges. You meditate with effort, you pray with conditions, you serve with expectation. You seek God with your mind while your heart is cluttered with attachments and ideas and desires and fears, all tightly held, all demanding attention. And the more you cling, the less you can receive. Because grace is not something that can enter a space already full. Truth is not something that arrives when there is no room for it to land. And love cannot flow where possession stands guard. You carry beliefs that no longer serve you, memories that no longer breathe, guilt that no longer belongs. And still you hold on because you think letting go means losing something. But the irony is that what you lose is exactly what has been holding you back. And what you gain when you release is not something new but something eternal. The rediscovery of what was always there but buried like the sky hidden behind clouds, not changed by their presence but simply unseen until they pass. You define yourself by your past, by your pain, by your story, and you wear these definitions like sacred badges, forgetting that they may have shaped your path, but they are not your essence. Because essence is not defined by experience but by presence. Not by what has happened but by what is always here, untouched, silent, deep, and the only way to reach it is not by adding more stories but by letting go of the one you keep telling yourself. You chase peace as if it is a prize, as if it must be earned, as if the path of God is a long road paved with discipline and effort and struggle. But the divine is not a mountain to climb. It is the space beneath your feet. It is the silence between your thoughts. It is the stillness behind your doing. And all it asks is that you stop running, stop trying, stop building more steps and instead realize that you are already home. You just needed to stop carrying the weight that made you forget how light you are. You must come to see that letting go is not giving up, not abandoning, not failure. It is simply the wisdom to recognize that the truth of who you are, through you what you seek, the presence of what you call God is not found by adding more layers of identity, not by decorating the self, but by surrendering what is false, what is temporary, what is loud, until what remains is the quiet, luminous, unshakable reality that was never far, never hidden, never absent, only covered by everything you thought you needed to be. You wake each morning and step into the same patterns, often unconsciously, repeating the same thoughts, reaching for the same devices, speaking the same words, walking the same mental corridors you walked yesterday and the day before and the day before that, and without realizing it. These repeated motions do not merely fill your time, they form your reality. For every habit is not just something you do, it is something that molds how you see, how you interpret, how you respond, how you measure meaning and make sense of what is unfolding around you. And so what you call perception is not neutral, not free, but filtered constantly by the grooves you have carved through repetition. You may believe you are open-minded, that you see the world as it is, that your reactions are spontaneous and your views are self-made, but every habit you maintain from the way you breathe to the way you judge a stranger's face, has laid tracks within your nervous system, within your emotional memory. And these tracks do not ask your permission each day. They simply run the train of your awareness along the same route, showing you not what is real but what is familiar. And because it is familiar, you assume it must be true. But in truth, it is just the path you walk the most. You reach for sugar when you are tired, you scroll when you are anxious, you speak when you are uncomfortable with silence, you react before you listen, and each time you do, the pattern strengthens. And over time, the pattern becomes the lens, and the lens becomes the world. And suddenly you no longer respond to reality, you respond to the echoes of your habits, replaying the same scenes with different characters, living a loop and calling it life, forgetting that perception is not the same as presence, because presence requires freedom from the pattern. You build habits not just with your actions but with your attention. What you choose to notice, what you choose to ignore, what you label as important or dangerous or beautiful or boring. And this repeated filtering creates a bias so subtle, so automatic that you rarely question it. Rarely pause to ask whether the world you see is the world as it is or the world your habits have trained you to expect. In this way, the more rigid your habits become, the more limited your perception becomes, until even the sacred passes before you and you do not recognize, not because it was hidden, but because your habits were blind to it. You can practice gratitude or complaint, patience or anger, stillness or distraction, and whichever you feed consistently becomes not just your mood but your lens. And this is why two people can walk through the same forest. And one sees only dirt and insects and inconvenience, while the other sees light filtering through leaves, hears birds singing as hymns, feels the earth breathing beneath their feet. Not because the forest changed, but because the one who sees has shaped their vision through their inner habits of awareness and receptivity and wonder. We long for peace, for clarity, for joy, but then you turn daily toward noise, toward stimulation, toward busyness, toward dizziness, toward judgment. And these daily choices etch grooves into our being that make it harder and harder to perceive the peace that is always here, the joy that requires no condition, the clarity that needs no answer, because your habits are not just what you do, they are what you train yourself to notice, and what you train yourself to notice becomes your entire experience of being alive. You do not become free by simply wanting freedom. You become free by changing the inner architecture of your perception. And that means reshaping your habits, not through force or guilt, but with gentle awareness, with reverence for how powerful even the smallest repetition is. How even one conscious breath taken each morning instead of unconscious rushing begins to soften the lens, begins to clean the glass, begins to remind you that what you perceive is not a fixed reality but a reflection of your own alignment, your own tuning, your own cultivated attention. So if you want to see clearly, if you want to hear what is true, if you want to feel the presence of the divine in the ordinary, you must become willing to look not just outward but inward, to observe the habits you have called just the way I am, and realize that you are not your habits. You are the awareness that can choose, that can shift, that can step out of the familiar long enough to meet the mystery without filters, without labels, without rehearsed reactions. And in that rawness, that openness, perception returns to what it always was beneath the patterns, a mirror, still and clear. You keep searching as if truth is somewhere else, hidden behind mountains, sealed in ancient books, whispered only to saints and sages far removed from ordinary life, and yet the truth is not hiding, it is not absent, it is not playing games with you. It is simply buried, buried beneath the noise you've inherited, beneath the identities you've worn for too long, beneath the layers of opinion and assumption and expectation that were never really yours. But you kept anyway, thinking they kept you safe, thinking they made you someone. And yet all they really did was cover what was already there, quiet and unmoving and eternal beneath all that pretending. You've been taught to look outward, to ask others, to collect answers, to build belief systems like fortresses. But no belief can take you to truth, because belief is still on the surface. Belief is structure, belief is mind, but truth is the silence beneath the mind, the space before thought, the knowing that doesn't speak in language, that doesn't arrive with explanation, that doesn't need to be believed because it simply is, and it is buried not because it is trying to stay hidden, but because you have forgotten how to stop digging in the wrong place. You were not born blind to truth, you were simply taught to look away from it, taught to fear silence, taught to mistrust stillness, taught to distract yourself with busyness and performance and judgment and control. And in that restless reaching, you laid yourself with so much dust that you forgot what it felt like to be clean, what it meant to see with the eyes you had before the world named you, before pain shaped you, before success and failure became gods you worshipped without realizing it. But beneath it all, truth remains, untouched, unmoved, waiting without waiting. You pray for answers, but often you are too noisy to receive them. You want clarity, but cannot bear the discomfort of unlearning. You say you want truth, but only if it confirms what you already believe. And this is how truth stays buried, not because it is far, but because it is too close, too intimate, too challenging to the self you've constructed. And the ego does not fear falsehood. It fears truth, does not flatter. Truth does not flatter, truth does not bargain, truth does not care who you think you are. It only reveals what is real beneath who you've imagined yourself to be. You dig through knowledge, through titles, through experiences, through philosophies, hoping one day you'll hit that solid stone of knowing. But you forget that truth is not found by adding more. It is uncovered by letting go, it is unearthed by dropping what is not essential, by seeing through the illusions you have become attached to, by peeling back everything that isn't you until only what cannot be taken away remains. And what remains is not a concept, not an opinion, not even a story. It is a presence silent and steady, beneath the noise of becoming. You ask where God is, where purpose is, where peace is, but they are all buried beneath the same pile of assumptions and fear and memory and distraction. And the moment you stop running, stop fixing, stop proving, stop seeking validation from a world that cannot even validate itself, the moment you simply listen without agenda, look without interpretation, feel without resistance, the soil begins to soften, the ground of being begins to breathe, and you find you don't need to be taught the truth, you only need to remember how to uncover it. You fear the digging because it means facing what you buried too, the grief, the doubt, the vulnerability, the raw tenderness of being human without a shield. But every time you turn toward that depth with courage, another layer falls away, another mask crumbles, and what you begin to touch is not weakness, but vastness, not confusion, but the clarity that was always waiting. Once you became empty enough to see without your mind blocking the view, and in that emptiness, the truth is not revealed like a secret. It is the space that remains when nothing false is left. So the journey is not toward truth as a destination, it is downward, inward into the quiet soil of your own being, where the truth has never left, never hidden, never fled. It was simply buried beneath everything you thought was more important. And now, if you are still enough, honest enough, surrendered enough, you may begin to feel its warmth breaking through the cracks. Not because it just arrived, but because you finally stopped burying it.